All right, folks, here's what we're building and displaying today. A 1/35th scale World War II German Panzer 38T from Italeri. While we scroll through the box contents, let's review this little tank. It's not a German design. It's Czech. But delays in getting the Panzer IIIs and IVs built meant that the Germans entered the war with trainers, Panzer Is, and light infantry support tanks, Panzer IIs. With the annexation of Czechoslovakia in 1938, the Germans acquired this tank, which entered service in 1935 and was given the moniker Panzerkampfwagen 38T, the T being for Czechoslovakia, as it's spelled with a T in German, not a C as it is in Czech and other Western languages. This light tank was definitely of an interwar design. Its main gun was 37 millimeters, which was more powerful than the Panzer II's 20 millimeter cannon, but it wasn't super powerful. However, this light little tank had a main gun of 37 millimeters, much more powerful than the Panzer II's 20 millimeter cannon, but it definitely was an interwar design with bolted and riveted armor panels and not much for sloping sides. However, this little tank was widely regarded as much more maneuverable and reliable than other German designs and saw service until 1942, when its small turret just couldn't house a large enough gun to stop Soviet armor. So this is my first 1/35th scale Italeri model, and I'm super impressed that it came with PE, a metal barrel, nice decals, and super clean parts. There was little to no flash, and cleanup was a snap on these plastic parts. And here at the bottom of the box are the 4 resin tanker figures that we painted up last week. See the video here. We start with the bottom tub and interior parts, which I pre-assembled and pre-painted. But first, I glued the suspension to the exterior and added the front lower hull and the interior firewall. I just figured those would be easier to put in place before I had all the interior parts in the handle and get caught and broke. But here you can see all the interior details, wall padding, seats, deck plates, drive pedals, and the throttle. Next, we need to add the pre-assembled and pre-painted transmission, which runs from the back to the front. And note that all the interior parts were painted ivory, as was the German custom. And with that, all the interior and road wheels are ready to go. All the exterior parts got a flat black primer coat and were set aside to dry. The lower hull also got its top coat of German gray, as I felt this would be a really hard place to paint with all the road wheels and tracks in place and not have some of this gray plastic show through. Speaking of tracks, this kit comes with molded track sections. Here I've laid out where each section will go and gave them a quick test fit. I'll prime and paint them separately after I add them to the road wheels before attaching the top hull later. Time to build the turret. The only tricky bit was the front armor under the gun mantelet, and here's where that exploded drawing really helps locate it perfectly. Again, you'll notice that all the interior parts of the turret were painted with that ivory color. Assembling the front of the turret, we get to build up the main gun and the turret machine gun. Here's that other cool bit we talked about with this kit. The main gun barrel is turned metal. No sanding of seams on a round tapered barrel and creating flat spots. This is the first time I've used white metal barrels, and I really like it. I can see this being, if the kit doesn't come with it, buying them separately. This really makes the tank pop. But this also means that we need to use thick CA glue to bond the metal to the plastic parts. The turret is finished off by gluing the cupola to the top. You'll notice the hatches are set closed. I used a little PVA glue to tack the hatches into the closed position so that when all the paint and weathering is completed, these will match the rest of the tank. I also did this with the front driver hatch on the main hull. You'll see that later when we get around the painting. I use PVA glue because the bond is fairly weak, and that way I can just pop open the hatches when I'm all done painting and then glue them into the final position for the diorama. But before buttoning up the vehicle, I need to get those tracks on and get them painted. Now, these sectional tracks are much better than Tamiya's rubber band tracks, but a bit finicky to get them linked up just right and to not sit wonky angles. Like the Japanese tank I did earlier, see the link here, I should have looked for some 3D printable link-and-link tracks. They are time consuming, but they are so worth it. It feels like you're actually crafting something. And I don't mind putting the time in for something that just brings me so much joy. The PE bends are pretty easy and intuitive. The most difficult bends are the holders and straps to the jerry cans. Just think through what needs to be on top of what and what needs to fold first. And here's a picture of all the rest of the PE parts super glued into place and ready for priming. Again, a flat black primer makes the most sense as the main color is dark gray. Vallejo's surface primer covered the plastic, the brass, and the white metal bits quite well. I gave it a solid 2 days for the primer to completely cure. Since this is an early war tank, it's all one color, no camouflage. Therefore, I'm going to modulate the color by spraying squiggly white primer onto each of the panel sections. This is a fun pre-shading technique that can bring big rewards if you take your time. The goal here is to concentrate the white to the center of the panel and then fade out to the panel joins, leaving the joins, or in this case the bolted on armor plates, black. And that way they'll end up shadowed and you'll get a faded paint color from the center out towards there, looking like the paint is faded and reflecting light at different angles. I use this same technique on the road wheels, concentrating on the centers and fading out towards the road rubber. For the top color, I chose to lighten my German Panzer gray with a few drops of sky gray. This will look better at scale as well as to help sell the faded paint job. Just be sure to run several light coats, not one big blast of color. Your first spray should look like you haven't even covered much at all, and by the time you get to the third or fourth coat, it'll be just right. Because if you flood the model with color and try and cover it all in one go, your panel pre-shading will be completely lost, and you run the risk of the paint running and dripping because it's just been flooded on the model and it's not going to stick. It's just going to run with gravity. Anyhow, after an overnight dry and cure, here are the results. I really like how well the pre-shading worked, but the tank is still missing something. That German gray has kind of a bluish tint, and especially in the early war vehicles, they all had that. So it's time for an oil wash. I chose Payne's Gray for my wash. This is a nice, super dark, almost black color, but it has a touch of a gray in it, and it really comes out nice. Thinning the oil paint down with odorless thinner and applying it all over all the exterior bits of the tank. Key though, be careful around those hatches. Remember, they're just kind of tacked in place, and you don't want the oil wash to run through the seam and stain the interior white. Don't forget the road wheels. I gave the wash 15 to 20 minutes to flash off the thinner and tint the acrylic paint. And then I just came back with a combination of dry and thinner, dampened cotton swabs to remove much of the oil paint. And what you're left with is a slightly darker gray, but a bluer gray that has the look and feel of a real object and not a plastic model. I think this picture here just shows you how well this technique works. I'll be using this in the future for all of my German gray vehicles. Weathering was straightforward. I just finished it up with some pastel powders, mostly browns and grays to simulate road dust, as this diorama is set in an early offensive operation. It could be the phony wars, the invasion of France, Poland, or Russia, but the roads would have been dry and dusty, not muddy like in the late spring or early fall. I kept the dirt mostly to the lower hull, as when I was doing my internet search and research on photos, most of the dirt from that time period was kind of kept under the fenders on the top hull. The diorama base was shaped pink foam glued to a 1/4 inch thick piece of craft plywood. I then came back and covered up all the pink foam with an air drying clay. I created a slight rise in one corner and the feel of a country dirt road running diagonally through the scene. Of course, as always, the clay cracked on me overnight, but I knew I was going to cover it all up with basing materials. So things like putting paint on it, using textured paste and European dirt and mud for the road, all that would cover up those cracks quite nice. And here you can see the finished result. After this was dried, everything, the mud and the dirt, was given a light dry brush of golden brown acrylic paint, and that just kind of helped to bring out the texture and to give the feel that even the muddy sections were kind of just torn up from the tracks and dried out. Again, PVA glue and burnt grass flocking were used as undergrowth for the grassy sections. And then I just came back and added in a couple of layers, first a 4mm and then a 7mm green long static grass using my static grass applicator and a little PVA glue. All that's left is to glue the tank to the base and then add our 4 tankers we previously painted. First up, the injured tank commander. Next, his second with a map that I had to hand make out of scrap paper. Third is a driver with his steel notebook. And lastly, our radio man / hull gunner. Oh, and a forged rabbit. Some crew is going to have more than bread for dinner tonight. I'll just finish with a 360-degree spin and just say that this was a very easy kit to build. I really love that it came with a PE, that it had decent tracks, although again, I would still look for link and link, and the metal gun. Just fantastic. And the paint job. It was a new technique for me, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And until next time, happy modeling.